Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
The biggest one for me has been using it as a notepad, really. I didn't think I would think of it as a notebook as much as I do, because traditionally when I've tried to journal or tried to do to-do lists and things like that, I'm always backing up into apps. So things like Day One or Apple Notes or OmniFocus, stuff like that. What I found with the Mini is I've started to do a journal in GoodNotes, but also a general running things of stuff I want to do within Notability. And I found that I'm carrying it around almost like a journal, like a paper journal.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. In this episode, we are joined by technology consultant and writer Lee Peterson. The main focus of this episode is getting work done on Lee's iPad of choice, the iPad Mini. We also touch a bit at the opening of the interview on 10 years of iPad, as this week is the anniversary of that original announcement on January 27th, 2010. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to Monday's episode where I kind of go through the opening keynote, have a listen to that. That is, I think, a really good look back at what that original announcement was and looking back at it today. As a reminder, you can support the podcast by leaving a review in Apple Podcast or financially by heading over to patreon.com/iPadPros. Every dollar is of huge help. Thank you if you currently or have in the past supported the show there. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. With that said, here's my interview with Lee, all about the iPad Mini. Enjoy. Can you first introduce yourself and what kind of work you do on the iPad, Lee?
So obviously my name's Lee Peterson, I'm based in the UK. My main device these days tends to be the iPad Mini, strangely enough. I've got kind of two jobs. So my day job, I'm a technical consultant for a large kind of company here. It's a US company. We've got a lot of presence in the UK as well. And I use the iPad Mini for that predominantly. So I'm making notes and sketching ideas and things like that. But I also freelance write, which is where I've used the iPad a lot as well. It's kind of where I started using it, was the freelance writing. So I've written for places like Cult of Mac, and I've done a few things for the Loop magazine when it was going back in the day. But mostly it's on my own blog. So it's lgpuk.blog. It's kind of write about productivity and apps and whatever kind of takes my fancy at that moment, to be honest. The iPad is predominantly probably 80% of anything I do basically happens on that.
And before we dive into, we're going to focus on the iPad Mini on this episode because I think it's a really interesting device for people to get work done. It's not exactly an iPad Pro, but before we dive into all that, we're now at basically 10 years since the iPad's been announced. That'll happen this week that this episode comes out. When that was announced, what did you initially think of it, and how long did it take you to adopt it into a productivity kind of device for yourself?
For me, I'd gotten into using Macs a few years before then. The white MacBook, the plastic one, that was my first Mac, and I'd gotten into iPhone, and I was doing predominantly a lot of the stuff already on the iPhone at that point. When it was released, I was really enthusiastic about it. I got one day one. In the UK, it was a little bit later than the States, if I remember rightly. I tried my best at that point from the iPad 1 to use it full time, but as you know, when it first came out, the software wasn't up to where we are now. I pretty much got every iPad, and to be honest, back sort of 2010 to probably about 3 or 4 years, I'd always tried to use the iPad as my primary device, but always fallen back to the Mac because of something was missing. Predominantly back then, it was either something to do with photography or something to do with music, because I play guitar and I like to record my own stuff, and it was very hard at that point to connect a lot of devices to it, because you needed to go through the headphone jack for a lot of stuff, and it was quite unreliable. The quality wasn't that great, so I used to fall back to my Mac for kind of more productive stuff, as in music production, not so much task managers and stuff like that. It wasn't really, to be honest, until the iPad Pro came out, the 12.9, that I went all in, and I've kept using it. Not the 12.9, but I've kept using the iPad predominantly for like 90% of the stuff I do. The only bit that I still struggle a little bit with is music stuff, but everything else I do on the iPad.
And it's kind of interesting, the original iPad had that keyboard stand that came with it. So they were thinking productivity from day one, but they didn't quite get there until many years later when they finally got the software as well as all the hardware more appropriate.
I mean, I remember using one the day it came out, and it just felt like the future. And to me, I'm still blown away using the iPad. I still take a step back and think, actually, what you're doing on a device that small, and that thin. It still amazes me even now, all this time later. And like I said, when the 12.9 came out and the smart keyboard and the pencil, that's when it all kind of clicked for me, and I used it for work more than I used to before. I didn't used to use it for my kind of day job that much, but as soon as the pencil came out, I use it probably about 70% of the time just writing on the iPad rather than using notepaper.
Yeah. My favorite thing to use that original keyboard dock for the iPad was using it with an iPod Touch, because it also fit into that slot. So you'd have this little
of course,
mobile typewriter, basically. It was great.
Yeah, I had a boss at the time that was big into Apple, and when the iPad came out, we both got one. And yeah, I remember using his a little bit. I never actually got that keyboard stand when it came out. I'd always kind of tried to Bluetooth keyboards in, but in the end, I just tended to use the glass most of the time.
Right.
Smart keyboards attached to my big iPad all the time, basically.
So let's dive into the iPad mini a bit. That's what we're going to focus on in this episode. And it's a device that I've owned in the past. I think I had the 4th generation. What are they on now? The 6th?
5th now.
5th. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I had the 4th and I sold it at some point. What inspired you this time around? You bought this 5th generation and then returned it and then bought it again. What was kind of the initial struggle with this device, and why get it again?
If I go back just a little bit, the iPad mini 2, one with the Retina screen, I had the very first one that came out. And then when the Retina one came out, I picked that one up straight away. And that's still used in our family today. That's my daughter's iPad pretty much. And that's how many days? That's quite a few years old now. And
yeah.
It's showing its age, but it's still going for the stuff that she's doing. When the 5 came out with the pencil support, that's what pushed me over for that one, because I sold my 12.9 iPad quite a while ago, and 10.5 inch Pro is my day-to-day, that's my machine. I travel with work and I do customer meetings, and having something that was smaller that I could take with me and make notes on, I wanted to give it a go, because I'd always liked that form factor, and having pencil support on it just seemed like a no-brainer to me. So I picked it up. I used it for a bit, and to be honest, I did invest in it when I got it, and I was using I bought the Logitech Crayon with it, and I was finding that the smaller screen was giving me some kind of, not RSI issues, but I was finding it less comfortable to write on because of the size of the screen.
Yeah.
So I'd returned it within my 15-day window, and I needed to do some traveling again with work, and I thought, no, I'm gonna give it another go, as I do. I don't always return stuff within the window. I don't like doing that, but I do take advantage of that sometimes. And I picked one up again, and I really invested in the Crayon again and using it. Even though it's not as comfortable as the bigger iPad, I've gotten used to using it, and I use it, if I'm on a train or I've sat waiting around. Even at home, I tend to pick up my mini now instead of using my phone, just because. I'm a bit older now. My eyes are not as good as they used to be as well. So
I mean, I'm the same way with my 10.5-inch iPad. That's my at-home device, and I rarely will use my phone. Like, why bother? I've got the iPad.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. And I was going through a thing. I think I had an iPhone. I think I would have had a 10 at the time. And it's a lot better now, but I was very frustrated with Face ID. And having an iPad with Touch ID felt better for me than having the iPhone, because I like the mini size, I like Touch ID. So for me, using the iPad mini was actually better than using my phone, because I didn't actually like using my phone that much because of the troubles I was having with Face ID.
Yeah.
Which thankfully have gotten better with the new phone. I don't seem to have any problems now, but I still just prefer that tactile unlocking with my phone. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm an old man yelling at the clouds, but it's for me, it's just comfortable, and I just like this. I do generally just love the mini size with do all sorts of stuff I do on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting size because things are just scaled down. The icons are smaller, things like that. I see kids with them at airports sometimes, and it's like, oh, that's actually perfect for a kid, as far as proportionally everything lines up with how they're working. And you actually don't lose any screen space, sort of, from like the 9.7 inch, because everything is just scaled down a bit.
The only time that sometimes I will reach over and get my 10.5 is when I read comic books. So I use I've got a Marvel Unlimited subscription, and I do like to read. The mini is okay for reading it, but sometimes the text is a little small.
Yeah,
and you have to zoom in more to see it. Whereas on the 10.5 and all the other bigger ones, then you can just read it. You don't have to do any zoom in. You can flick through it. So that's the only time that I tend to fall back to the bigger iPad is reading comics, really.
Yeah, and do you see yourself ever using the bigger iPad Pro side by side with the mini? Are there situations where you're using both iPads simultaneously?
Occasionally, when I'm doing something where I want a reference rather than... I'm not a huge fan of it, but I don't tend to use the split screen that much. I'm still very much a one-app person, I tend to just have one app at a time. And sometimes if I'm doing something, I might have maybe a video running on the iPad and I might make notes on the Mini. And I've even used the Mini with my Mac as well. If I'm recording guitar or something on my Mac, I might actually push something over from my Mac onto the Mini, with the new features within macOS. Sidecar, is it? I do tend to push stuff over to there as well. If I just want to look at some guitar tablature or a video, or I just have Apple Music over there. I've used it more than I thought I would, actually, in that respect.
Because this is the Mini that's just as fast as the current Air, is that right?
I think so, yeah. I've not noticed it slowing down. It's quick. I think, is it quicker than the 10.5? Or is it the same processor?
I think it'd be the same processor, but I think a similar phenomenon to the iPhone SE, where it feels faster than the 6S because it's driving a smaller screen. I think there's something to that. With the screen being smaller, there's less to push.
Less pixels, yeah, that would make sense, because it definitely feels snappier than my 10.5. I think I need a refresh on my 10.5 because I'm noticing things like GarageBand. I'm having a lot of latency issues and the app just crashing, and I don't really want to replace it.
Yeah.
So I do like the 10.5. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there with that one. But yeah, performance-wise on the Mini, on this latest one, I've not had any issues, even using GarageBand and recording instruments on it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you use the pencil quite a bit. How do you carry it? Do you have a special case that has a pencil holder with it, or? No,
nothing that elegant. It just tends to go in my bag. So if I'm traveling, if I'm with work, for instance, I'll have my laptop, my work laptop. I'll have a laptop bag. So my big work laptop will be in there, but also the Mini and the pencil will just be in a pocket there somewhere.
And you just have one. You don't have a second that's like charged up in case your first one is out of battery.
The only one that I use with the Mini is the the Logitech crayon.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So I've got a pencil which is permanently paired with my 10.5. I bought the Logitech crayon, one because I wanted to try it, but also because I thought, well, I'll just keep it with the Mini. And to be honest, I prefer the crayon. I prefer the texture to it, and the weight is a bit lighter, I think, than the pencil, but also it's the shape and the texture on it, because it's like a metal texture rather than I find the pencil good, but it's a little bit slippery. I find it a little bit uncomfortable over time, where the crayon is, if you haven't tried one, then I definitely recommend checking one out in store, because I think I prefer it to the pencil.
It's triangle shaped, the crayon, is that right?
It's kind of rectangular if you're looking down it, and it's not triangular to hold. It is more flat.
Okay.
Because the only thing that I've noticed is the pencil tip seems a little kind of more rigid than the Apple Pencil one. It feels a bit more plasticky.
Okay.
When you start using it, it does feel different to the pencil. Not a huge amount, but you can notice it if you write a lot. It feels a little bit more slippery.
And with that one, there's a power switch to turn it off when you're actually done with it, which is nice. Because I have the original Apple Pencils because I'm still on the second generation iPad Pro. So I have experienced where the pencil's just dead and takes a bit to charge it back up, and that does seem like a nice thing. Am I right that the crayon's only compatible with third generation Pros and this current generation of the Mini and the Air? Is that accurate?
I think so, yeah. I'm not sure about testing it on newer devices. I know it doesn't work on the 10.5, but it works. It works really well. I really like it. I really like the crayon. As
far as the keyboard, do you use an external keyboard, or what do you do there?
I use the glass, to be honest. I did try one. I bought a third party, an Amazon one of these ones with the, you can click the key, the iPad into it. So it's like a case. It was terrible. I thought the keys were so small. I've not done this, but the only way I would type with this iPad is to use, an Apple keyboard and a Bluetooth keyboard. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend buying a smaller case. I would love it if Apple somehow could bring out a smart keyboard for it that had bigger keys, but I don't ever see that happening. So it's not something I'm gonna bank on. But yeah, to be honest, if I'm writing like a blog post up, I tend to just thumb type on it, because my blog posts are quite small. Unless I'm doing a review of something, I tend to just thumb type, to be honest.
With the iPad Mini, you can do the iPhone keyboard thing and do the swipe thing as well, I'd imagine, right?
You can do that, yeah. You can shrink it and you can get the little keyboard on the side like you do with the bigger one. But I find it comfortable just to hold in portrait and just thumb type it.
So you mentioned it being a bit more difficult to use the pencil with the smaller screen. What are you exactly using the pencil for? You're taking notes during client meetings? Is that the main use of it?
If I'm away on a client site, then I'll use Notability. I'll use that just to write notes down from the meeting. What I do sometimes is if I can do a diagram to help explain something a bit better, I might do that outside of the meeting or in the meeting, and I can send that to them direct. If I'm at home, to be honest, I use it just as my notebook. I tend to work on pen in terms of my to-do list, and productivity stuff is all handwritten for me for when it comes to work. So it is my notebook with everything in it. So, my to-dos and what I've got to do today, tomorrow, all the rest of it. So I just replaced my field notes effectively with this mini.
Very cool. And apps in split screen, you mentioned you don't use it much, but if you do use split screen on the mini, what's that experience like? So you already have a smaller screen, and then splitting that in half. Are you basically getting iPhone apps at this point?
Yeah, I think so. The only way I've done it is, as I tend to switch productivity apps quite frequently, which is something I'm trying to sort out. I might put two productivity apps side by side and move them across from one up to the other, or copy and paste or whatever. So that's the only time I've done it, to be honest. But with the mini, is very much a notebook for me.
Yeah.
So I'll just have a Notability full screen, or I might go into. I've started to do mind maps as well. So using something like MindNode, so it's quite good for that as well for doing mind maps. But yeah, typically I'll just operate in one app on the mini.
Now you mentioned photography is kind of something you're really into.
Yeah.
How do you use the mini in that workflow, and does it excel in different ways from the iPad Pro with its size, letting you bring it in different environments?
The size is a big one for me. So if I go to air shows quite a lot, or just go out with the family, go out the day, I take my Canon, my DSLR, and I've got the SD adapter. I basically what I do is I just use it for backing up my memory cards if I'm out and about. If I'm out for something like an air show, you're there for the whole day and you haven't got stuff happening all day. So what I'll tend to do is, if I've shot a load of photos, I'll use the SD card reader, put them onto the mini, and then quickly go through them, and I can say, all right, delete, or I can even load an app, just go into photos and do a bit of editing just to pass a bit of time. But the main thing for me was the performance of the mini is up there now, where you can do this stuff and you can run some of these kind of heavier apps like Procreate, or Lightroom, or I use Darkroom and Affinity Photo as well. But yes, portability is the main reason for me. Yeah. I don't feel like I'm losing that much, in terms of quality from the bigger one. It's just so much easier just to carry it. I can put it in my pocket, if I'm wearing jeans. So yeah, perfect really for me, for size wise. Because camera bags have got a lot of space in them. I could put my laptop in there if I wanted to, but if you're carrying batteries around and lenses, then the smaller you can get your devices, the better.
And how much capacity is on that iPad?
This is a 256.
And you also would have to buy less SD cards for your camera if you're offloading and deleting, right? You wouldn't need to actually swap cards. You can just delete.
I can do that, yeah. What I tend to do, though, is I like backups of backups. So if you're going out with a family, you tend to keep more shots. Whereas if you're going to an air show, stuff moves really quickly. So when you're taking shots, you're panning, say scanning a plane taking off, and these are military stuff, so it's already fast. You got a lot of shots with people's heads, or the backs of people's heads, or the sky. So it's you can go in and quickly delete those, and it makes it so much easier when you eventually offload them all. Mm-hmm. After a 3 or 4 day show. So it works really well for that.
And for post processing, is the screen big enough for you to do work on it, or are you not seeing enough of the image to actually do what you want to do there?
For me, it works fine. I'm a hobbyist. I'm not a professional, so for me, having the mini size is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Obviously having the 12.9 was great for photos, but the small one's just as good because I value the portability.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of hidden gem apps that you use on the mini that you really love, apps that aren't super well known?
Some of the ones I like are ones that a lot of people know, I think. So things like Ferrite for recording, or IA Writer for writing, or Darkroom for photo editing. Where I really like using it is for like the guitar stuff and reading guitar tablature and things like that. So there's some good kind of guitar tablature apps that I use. I've got about 4 or 5 on this. And they're all called really, really bad naming. But there's one from Ultimate Guitar, which is just literally called Tabs, which is imaginative. But I use that as bringing up music tablature effectively on your notation, so that if you're learning a particular song, or if you're following along with trying to learn something, you've got the sheet music effectively there that you can use. Yeah. And we do that as well for my daughter plays piano, so we can just have it sideways on a music stand, and you can just follow along that size. And that's another good thing for the mini size is music stands. They will take a lot of weight, But obviously you want something lighter so that it doesn't fall off the piano or fall onto the floor. So it's been really good in that respect, more for the music stuff, to be honest. Most of the apps I use are ones that I think everybody else uses. The more popular apps like your OmniFocuses or your Fantasticals or Apple Notes or Photos, Reader for RSS stuff. That's one maybe that's not so much for production, but I use Reader for reading RSS. So REEDER.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that one. I've used RSS less and less over the years. I used to use it a lot more back in the college era when I was going to school. These days, it seems to even harder to find the RSS feeds for places as well.
I've gone the other way. I've kind of switched back to RSS. But something like Reader, if you're adding a URL, you can just put in the URL and it'll find the feed for you.
Oh, brilliant. So you just go to the homepage and type that in.
You add the feed and it can figure out where most of the time anyway. I can't remember in many instances where it hasn't found the RSS feed.
Yeah.
You can just subscribe to it within the app. I just find it a lot easier just to consume content via RSS.
Sure.
It's than traditional going to the site and getting loads of ads in your face.
Yeah. So has there anything that's been kind of surprising about using the Mini to get work done? Something that when you initially got it, you were not so sure about. Now it's like, wow, this is any aha moments.
I think the biggest one for me has been using it as a notepad, really. I didn't think I would think of it as a notebook as much as I do, because traditionally when I've tried to journal or tried to do to-do lists and things like that, I'm always backing up into apps. So things like Day One or Apple Notes or OmniFocus, stuff like that. What I found with the Mini is I've started to do a journal in GoodNotes, but also a general running things of stuff I want to do within Notability. And I found that I'm carrying it around almost like a journal, like a paper journal. So I've got no problem getting the crayon, writing down what I need to do, ticking stuff off, and treating it literally like a paper journal or a paper notepad.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised at how much I use that. That's probably the one for me, is, consuming content and, that kind of stuff you can do on any of these devices. But for me, because of the size and the portability of the Mini, I'm really carrying it around with me. And at the end of the day, if I write a few thoughts down, or in the morning, I'll write a few things I want to do today. I'm actually falling away from using a traditional kind of to-do app and falling more back into, writing things down, basically, and treating this as a paper notebook rather than an iPad.
Yeah.
Which is probably the biggest thing for me. That was the main thing I wanted to get out of it. And it seems to be that's the way that it's kind of gone over time.
Now, the iPad Mini, it went many, many years without an upgrade. We thought it might have been killed off, but it wasn't. If it was updated again, what kind of things would you like to see it add to or change?
It's two things. I could see keeping the same form factor, but bumping the screen up. So maybe putting Face ID on it.
Yeah.
Maybe taking the bezels away as much as you can, so you get a bigger screen in this form factor. That would be one that would be really good. And the other one would be USB-C. And I've never really been someone who's advocated for having USB-C on iPads. And I haven't got a USB-C on any of my iPads. But the more of the devices I've got, like I use a MacBook, 12-inch MacBook. I've got a Nintendo Switch. My work laptop is USB-C. So many devices I've got are USB-C, and also some of the music equipment that I plug into stuff is USB-C. And the number of times I'm getting frustrated at Lightning now is I didn't think I would be. But yeah, I think a bigger screen, lose the bezels effectively, and USB-C just for that convenience of charging.
Yeah. Now, your division of labor, when do you use the Mac? When do you use the bigger iPad? When do you use the Mini? How's that divide up?
So for me, the only time I really use a Mac now is when I want to record. So the one thing that's still a little frustrating about using iOS is for music recording. And there's two problems. One is GarageBand is a little bit unreliable. And I don't know, like I said a little bit earlier, I don't know if that's because of the age of the iPad or whether that is not a good app, And the audio interface is, again, if it was USB-C, I'd have a bit more flexibility. The audio interfaces that I use plug into my Mac really easy. And I prefer using Logic Pro on my Mac than I do GarageBand on the iPad. So whether Logic Pro came over to the iPad might help, and USB may help. If both of those things came in, I could probably get away with not using a Mac at all. But Mac is probably about 10% probably. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the time is probably, out of that 90%, is probably 60% mini and what's that, 30% 10.5.
Yeah.
And my phone hardly gets used at home.
Huh. Yeah. For recommendations, and who would you recommend the Mini to over, say, the Pros or even the new Air? And I say new Air, but it's quite old at this point.
Yeah, I know a lot of people say kids. The Mini is perfect for kids. Now, my daughter, she's got a Mini, but she's quite happy on any of the iPads that we've got. I think the reason I think a lot of people used to go for them was maybe because they were one of the cheaper devices.
Yeah, not anymore. It's a little bit of a premium device. Like you pay similar amounts to the Air. Is that right?
It's more, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I paid over $500 for this. I can't remember the without looking at the prices. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's not as the lowest iPad you can get. The 9.7
or 10.1.
The old 9.7, 10. Yeah, that's probably the best one, even for kids. I would say the Mini now is for basically anyone that wants to travel a lot with it. Like I said, for me, using it as a field note, as a portable, as a notebook, where I don't have to keep buying notebooks every 2 months, and I can export my notes out, being on client sites, being in work, even if it's not client stuff, even if you're if you're in an office or working from home, making notes as part of your day job, but getting away from pen and paper. I think the Mini is worth a shout. I don't necessarily think it's just for kids.
Yeah.
I think it's for anyone that just wants something really, really light and portable, because performance-wise, it's been great. And, doing my photography, doing the music stuff when I can get it to work properly, making notes on it every day, watching videos, listening to music. It does everything you want. I think it literally does just come down to portability, and which seems a bit strange because all the iPads are very portable. But if you are traveling with a lot of kit, then anything you can do to reduce the size of your technology is probably a good thing. But yeah, that's what I think as far as basically anyone that wants to use it as a field note, as digital field note.
And are you a smart cover user, or what case do you use?
Yeah. Just a smart cover, yeah. I don't tend to baby my Apple devices that much. They don't get banged around. I do look after them, but I tend to, either the back will be covered in stickers within a few months, which a lot of people will cringe about. But for this one, I did buy screen protector for it.
Okay.
Just a an Amazon cheap jobby, which is fine. It works absolutely fine. And the smart cover, which is an official one, one of the official Apple ones, which I wish they did a few more colours, because when I bought mine, you could only get it in like grey and papaya or something like that. I got grey, and it picks up all the grime and stuff.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a particularly dirty person, but it shows wear really quickly.
Do you know if they make the screen protectors that give it like a tactile feel for the pencil, or is that only the bigger iPad?
So I'm not sure. The paper, I think it's called paper, isn't it? There's one that's out there a lot of people rave about. But yeah, no, I'm not sure if they do it for this size, because I will have a look into that, because the one I've got, I think that's the reason why the crayon maybe doesn't feel as good as on my bigger iPad, because the bigger iPad I've got hasn't got a screen protector at all. So I think maybe the cheap screen protector probably isn't helping the feel of the pencil on the screen.
Yeah, but I'm the same way as far as I love the smart connector. I use the smart keyboard, but I don't want anything on the back of the iPad, because when I set my iPad down, I just set it down face down, and it's protected on the table that way. It seems fine.
I'm the same with my phone as well, where I don't tend to use cases. I buy Apple Care on all my devices. I've got it on this iPad as well. I buy Apple Care on stuff I know is going to go out of the house a lot. So if it's something that I'm likely to break, and I do normally end up going through at least one of the Apple Care replacements, but I just don't like all the plastic and everything on top of the device.
Yeah, I have a case I'll take on hikes if I'm going on a hike, a purpose-driven case. If it's like, I'm going on a hike, let me put you in the case today. But that's about it.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. If I'm out on a day trip somewhere to a theme park, or wherever, out for a hike, like you said, for a walk, if you're going to be in a position where you want to take a lot of photos and you don't have to worry about it, then yeah, if you've got an OtterBox lying around or whatever, then yeah, I'm the same. I use it for those, because the last thing you want to do if you're on holiday or out for a long walk is break your phone and then have to worry about having to try and get an Apple Store appointment to get it replaced.
So anything we didn't cover about getting work done on the iPad mini that you'd like to before we wrap it up?
I think I've got everything. I think I've covered everything that I had in my notes. In a way, it's kind of, once you've used an iPad and you kind of, how it works, they all work very similar, don't they?
Yeah.
It tends to be the form factor that makes the change. And for me, like I said, the mini is for me anyway, is almost the perfect form factor, because of the way it's replaced my need for a paper notebook, and being able to just chuck it in a bag and not worry about it, being able to put photos on it, being able to watch videos on it, be able to take it on holiday, be able to listen to music. It's for me, it's almost the perfect iPad.
For the Mini, I'd almost, as we talked about purpose-driven cases, I almost want a case that I could pop on that has like a hand grip, so I can be writing on it while standing and it's not slipping out of my hand or something. That would be kind of a nice addition for that one.
Yeah, I bet you could probably get something like that.
Yeah.
On the Mini 2, when my daughter was a bit younger, I got sent some cases by Spec for review. Mm-hmm. They were like these more sturdy, like kid-friendly ones that had handles on the back and had all these. So there's probably stuff out there. That's one of the good things, again, with iPad is you can go and find pretty much, if it's a certain case that you want, odds are that if you go on Amazon, you'll find it because there's a massive market for it.
Yeah, and this form factor has remained, I think, identical since the original Mini. Nothing, it's gotten thinner maybe, right? A little bit? Or
maybe.
Is it the same? It might be the same as that.
No, it is different. When the original Mini came out,
yeah,
I bought a leather case, one of the Apple leather cases, but it was one that had a back as well. Mm-hmm. So you kind of in. It's a bit like the Apple leather cases for the phones.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much that for a Mini with a cover on the front of it. And when I went, and I was just curious to see if it fitted, and it doesn't fit this new one. So They changed something. Yeah, the Mini 1 and Mini 2 were the same. And then they changed something in the duration between the 5, and the 5 doesn't fit those Mini 2 or Mini 1 or 2 cases anymore.
Okay. I imagine 3, 4, and 5 are the same.
Maybe, guess. Yeah. And even the magnets are different too, because I had a smart cover from the original, and that doesn't fit either. So they must have done something with the magnets inside it too.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not a huge deal because they're on my daughter's iPad anyways.
Yeah. Well, Lee, with that, where can people find the work you do, the writing you do on various websites and your blog?
The best place to go is just to my blog, really, which is where I do everything these days. So it's ljpuk.blog, and that'll be links off to everything I do from there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate learning more about using the Mini to get work done. It's a device I'm very curious about myself.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's been good.
Well, that was my interview with Lee. Thanks to Lee for his time recording, and thanks to you for your time tuning in and listening. As mentioned at the top of the episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts right now to leave a review if you haven't already. Every review is of huge help making the show more visible in search and helping those algorithms pop up the show more so others can discover the podcast. You can also financially support the show over at patreon.com/iPadPros. With that, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to everyone again real soon.